In this video, we will talk about how American to produce. Before I started, I want to ask you a question. Do you still remember the 4 factors of production mentioned in chapter 1? I give you 3 seconds to think about it. Yeah, I think most of you have already got it. So the 4 factors are labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. So in order to answer this question for specifically for United States, we need to consider how a country produce depend on what the resources input are available. For the nation, the key among the resources input is capital, the human capital, the knowledge and skills processed by the workforce, the physical capital, the facilities, tools, equipment, and infrastructure available to the workforce. So think about if you want to produce the iPhone, what do you want? You definitely need the factory, right? And you need to have a different machines to help you to make the iPhone. Obviously, the people need to be talented enough to create and try to update different model of the iPhone from the iPhone 3, 4S, 5, 5S, 5C. So all those creation need the human capital. So remember, the key resources input is capital. The capital include both human capital and physical capital. And so since the capital is so important, we need to understand the investment in capital. So it heavily in the human capital, a massive amount of the physical capital. The higher productivity, higher educated worker with high technology equipment in capital-intensive production process. And American households are able to consume so much because American workers produce so much. So it's a really very interesting statement. American households are able to consume so much because American workers produce so much. And at the same time, because American households consume so much, the American worker have incentive to produce much, right? Actually, for most countries, they are considered, do we have more capital or more labor in our production? Actually, for the rich countries, they tend to be capital intensive, while the poorer countries tend to be labor intensive. So actually, you are not unfamiliar with the capital intensive and the labor intensive, but how economies define them. So the capital intensive is capital is abundant and relatively low cost, and the labor is costly. So for those countries, they will adopt the capital intensive economy. So for those country capital is unavailable or very expensive, but the labor is cheap, they will adopt the labor intensive. So can you think about some example, some sample example countries which have capital intensive and which country have the labor intensive? Yes, obviously the United States are a capital intensive country because the technologies are so advanced, so that is can be counted as human capital, and also the equipment are very advanced. Those are physical capital, but the labor is very costly. Can you imagine if you just go to see the doctor for 15 minutes, it will charge a huge money, right? So in the United States, the labor is very costly. And how about the labor-intensive country, such as Vietnam? So if the Vietnam's labor is super cheap, now you can find many international, the big companies, they will open the manufacturing in Vietnam. Why? Because the labor there is so cheap, people can use it to produce a cheap product. So like the Vietnam, which belong to a poor country, they adopt the labor-intensive production. How about other factors which will affect how American produce? The first is the technological advancement. So what does that mean? The technological advancement means you can find new and better way to produce products. So for instance, like people produce the iPhone. I believe the nowadays how people produce the iPhone should be totally different from people many years ago to produce the iPhone, and that's why it kind of dropped down the price of the iPhone. So when technology advanced, an economy can produce more output with existing resources. So can you imagine how fast people can produce iPhone within one day compared with 10 years ago? So it's really a big change. All this change is because the technology advance. So if we have the technology advance, what it will be the consequence on the production possibility curve? Yes, I don't need to say you must be understand. So since the technological advanced, it increase the output within the certain resources. So that means your production possibility curve will shift outward. So that is important. When we have technological advance, the production possibility curve shift outward. How about other factors which will affect how American produce? The next one is the factor mobility. So the rapidly reallocation of resources from declining industry to expanding industries. So can you think about how the economy changed in Erie? So many years ago, Erie, surrounded by the city, produced the crude oil, but people don't pay more attention on reserve it. And then nowadays, people realize they don't really have enough crude oil to support the whole economy. So what they are doing now is trying to explore the renewable energy, such as the wind farm and the offshore wind farm, which should be located in the Erie Lake, and also the solar panel. If you have time to travel around the campus, you will find the fancy solar panel next to the exercise dome. So that fancy the factor mobility when the factor mobility happen, the economy should increase. And also the next one is outsourcing and the trade. So people taking advantage of the lower opportunity costs around the world and exploiting technological advancement to use resources from around the world. So that is outsourcing and the trade. So for the United States, U.S. workers have a comparative advantage in higher skill, capital-intensive jobs. If you have time to visit China, you can find a lot of American experts working in China, trying to help China to develop their technology. And also, workers in other countries have the comparative advantage in lower skill, labor-intensive jobs, such as the Mexican and China. They do satisfy this criteria. So outsourcing flows both ways. Some jobs leaving the United States and the other jobs coming to the United States. So you can see how many talented scientists, experts move to China to help China, India, and Mexican on their technology development. At the same time, China, India, and the Mexican, they import a lot of cheap labor to help to build, to help to make the U.S. economy increase, get improved. So the next video we will talk about the role of government.